guys, we made it. We're at the end, right? So today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the Clinton administration and the George W. Bush administrations to sort of wrap up the unit here. So we're going to be covering a lot of material, so hang tight. I'm going to try and get through it as quickly as I can for you, but there's a lot of stuff here, so let's get started. So when Clinton runs for president in 1993, he's seen as very different, right? So Democrats, think about the last Democratic president we had. It was Lyndon Johnson. Old, harsh guy, right? Well, when Clinton runs against George H.W. Bush in 1992, he really is kind of seen as this young, attractive, very different, very charismatic, very outgoing kind of guy. And he is what we called a new Democrat. Right? So as a new Democrat, he's from the South, and he's kind of a conservative Democrat in some ways. So he's pro-death penalty, which you don't often think of for Democrats, but he's also welfare reform. You know, he wants health care and universal health care. So we kind of see him as a combination of old conservative values, but democratic liberal ideals. Right? So some of the things he wanted, like I said, welfare reform, balanced budget. He really focuses on the economy because that had gone down so much in the 90s. So that's going to be a big focus of Clinton's administration. And by the time the election rolls around, he is a decisive winner, definitely beats George W. Bush by 6% of the vote, popular and electoral. It was really a no-brainer. Bush had just been so unpopular by the end of his administration, he couldn't win against this charismatic young guy, right? So in terms of Nixon's domestic policy, his first priority is healthcare reform. So this is nothing new in our society. So the goal that he has is universal coverage, so healthcare for everyone. There are some problems, however, and some of these problems you will notice are still problems that are talked about today. So a lot of doctors and the insurance industry are not on board with this. A lot of people are saying it's going to take too much time and too much effort, too much money. So that's some of the problem. Another problem is that he puts his wife in charge. So Hillary Clinton, who is the first lady, is put in charge of this. And that's kind of seen as like above what she's supposed to be doing. People were not crazy about that idea. It does fail to pass. And there is a child program called S-CHIP that passes. So like that's kind of part of Medicaid to give children health care. But for the most part, it does fail to pass. The idea doesn't go anywhere. And of course, as we know, under Barack Obama's administration, this becomes a really central issue. And the next thing that he has to do is balance the budget. So the internet boom of the 90s raises a lot of tax revenue. So the internet is this new thing, right? And everybody's getting a share of it. Everybody's getting involved of it. And a lot of tax money is being raised because of this. So a lot of money's coming into the government. Also, after the welfare reform, it cut some of that government spending, right? So spending is cut from the government while taxes are being raised. So there's more money coming in and not as much money going out. So the other part of this is that Clinton actually, in order to balance the budget, cut some programs that he promised that he was going to keep in the election. So you can kind of see this as like a broken promise a lot of people are not insane about. But again, what it does is it balances the budget for the first time since 1828. Right, under Andrew Jackson. That's a really big accomplishment of Clinton's administration, is that now our budget is equal. We're not in debt, right? That's what that's all about. So I mentioned the welfare reform just a second ago. Let me tell you a little bit about what they do with that. So the idea behind this is he's going to take control of where Nixon had actually really tried to do in the late 60s and early 70s. So the first thing he has to do is work with Republicans in Congress, right? We know that that's not going to happen just by himself, especially when the Republicans control the Congress. So what they do is they require work for welfare recipients with school-age kids. So if you're going to receive welfare, you got to have a job if you have children, right? The idea being that welfare isn't supposed to be your entire income. It's supposed to help support your income, supplement your income, right? And the longest you can receive welfare is 5 years. After 5 years, you can no longer receive welfare benefits. You have to reapply and all that stuff. So the idea is that every 5 years we check back in, make sure, are you trying to get a job? Are you trying to improve your situation? What's going on, right? And of course, if you are, but you're just having a hard time, then you can reapply for welfare, right? So that's sort of what that's about. This actually cut the number of people taking welfare in our country by 50%. So that's huge, right? There were so many people on welfare before Clinton comes in, and that's a huge cut, right? The other major domestic problem that we have at this time is an increase in violence. So there are a couple instances of some homegrown terrorism or homegrown violence. And you may have heard of these before, but they're very important to understand. So the first is the Oklahoma City bombing. So there were two guys, they were white militants. Their names were Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols. And they were really upset by some government programs that were going on. So what they do is they load a pickup truck full of bombs and back into a federal government building in Oklahoma City, including a daycare that was on the first floor. This is a tragic, tragic event. It's really the first time this has happened in American history. 168 people die, more than 800 are injured, including those children in the daycare. And this is such a major blow to the American people and to the American psyche, right? It shows that we are vulnerable to these random terrorist plots. And of course, that has only increased since, the 90s, since this happened. But this was really the first time America was made aware of this kind of thing, the first time this sort of violence had really ever happened, right? The next big instance of violence is at Columbine High School in 1999. So on April 20th of that year, 2 students go on a shooting rampage. 12 students and a teacher are killed. This was the first time ever that we had a school shooting. So this was in the news for weeks, right? They were talking about it all the time. That raised a lot of questions of like, how can we prevent something like this? Can we put a focus on bullying? And it was considered a huge tragedy. It really showed the vulnerability of our school system to random acts of violence. Now, that was 1999. That was almost 20 years ago. This is something that we've seen at a more increasing rate ever since then. There's not really a good solution yet. We've not really come to a solution to solve this problem. Like I said, it does put more attention focused on bullying and the effects of bullying, teen isolation. Before the 90s, we didn't really talk about bullying in schools. Like, I never heard about it growing up. I knew it happened, right? But it's not something we talked about. But now we talk about it, like if you see it, say something, that kind of thing. So this really brought more attention to those issues in our school system. However, it wasn't just homegrown terrorism. We also experienced some of our first foreign terrorism, starting with the World Trade Center bombings. So in 1993, an Al-Qaeda-inspired group, so Al-Qaeda is the extremist Muslim group in mostly Afghanistan, basically detonate a car bomb under the center. So if you think about like the towers, right? Underneath that was a parking garage that you could kind of drive under. It was sort of like a cellar. So what they did was they put the car in the parking garage and kind of left it, right? 6 people were killed, a little over 1,000 people were injured. It did not do what they were hoping it would do. They were hoping it would bring the building down. It didn't. But this was a really big deal. It foreshadowed the attack in 2001, which of course there are going to be a lot more people killed in that. But they really kind of showed America that there's this global need. You don't have to write down that second bullet, by the way. There's really this global need to fight a war against terrorism. And Clinton actually got a lot of crap because he didn't really do anything about it at the time. And so a lot of people were like, wait, is he just hiding under his desk scared? Like, we got to take revenge on this. And he didn't really do anything about it. So a lot of people kind of took that as a sign of weakness for Clinton. So as a result, the Republicans are going to take control of the House of Representatives. Under Speaker Newt Gingrich, he makes what he calls a contract with America. And this is basically saying we are going to oppose Clinton's policies as much as we can. It's a very conservative idea. Like, I'm making a contract with you right now that we are going to have good conservative values, right? So basically, his goal is to block everything that Clinton does. This is ultimately going to lead to a government shutdown because the Democrats and the Republicans cannot come to an agreement, right? Well, so in 1995, the country shut down, the government shut down over a budget issue. Basically, the Republicans wanted to cut spending. Clinton wanted to increase programs. Ultimately, the Republicans get blamed, and it makes them look pretty bad. And Clinton will get reelected in 1996. However, when the government shut down, that means pretty much all paid employees go home, okay? Well, the only people then who are working in federal buildings are interns. Interns like a young woman named Monica Lewinsky. The government shutdown actually gave Clinton, let's just say, access to Miss Lewinsky. So that's going to be really the crux of his second term. So as Nixon was running in the 1992 campaign, there are a lot of allegations or accusations that he has been less than faithful to his wife. There were also allegations of sexual harassment while he was governor of Arkansas. So Jennifer Flowers was, and Paula Jones were two women who came forward to say, hey, I had an affair with him. Hey, he harassed me. On top of that, there was an investigation in something called Whitewater, where basically, like, this was a real estate deal that seemed a little sketch that the Clintons were both involved in. It didn't hurt him in 1992. However, there are continuing investigations, including a guy named Ken Starr, who was a special prosecutor who was assigned to the case. And while he was investigating, some interesting things came up. So a phone conversation between Linda Tripp and Monica Lewinsky basically was turned over, where Lewinsky was telling Linda about her affair with the President of the United States during the government shutdown. Wow, this is a major, major scandal, right? So immediately when this breaks, the country is up in arms. They're like, we want to solve this problem. We want to know what happened, right? And a lot of people are saying we should impeach the president. So while they were deposing, right? So when people are involved in a civil suit like that, you know, they ask questions to the people who are involved. And when you are getting a deposition done, you are under oath, just like if you were on stand at a trial. So famously, during his deposition, President Clinton made the statement, I did not have sexual relations with that woman, right? Well, when that evidence came out, it was very clear that actually he did. There was a lot of evidence. So he is not impeached for having a relationship or an affair with Monica Lewinsky. He is impeached for lying under oath, which is perjury, right? This is a lot of people a little confused by this, but eventually it will go to the Senate. The Senate holds the trial. Impeachment is just the trial. It's not the result. But ultimately he is found not guilty and he keeps his job. However, this did make him look really, really bad. Americans are very mad that Clinton lied to him, and this is going to hurt, even though he's not running again, it's going to hurt his vice president's, Al Gore. It is never tried in federal courts. I should point that out as well. So there we go. That's the impeachment trial. Last but not least, we have his foreign policy. So we are kind of in between two wars here, right? So George H.W. Bush was the Gulf War. George W. Bush, after 2001, is the Afghan War. So Clinton, obviously he doesn't know the Afghan War is coming, but what he wants to do as part of foreign policy is peacekeeping. So he sends troops to places that he sees are violating human rights. right? So he's kind of trying to prevent that. So he sends troops to Yugoslavia, where there is a genocide taking place, to Somalia, where there is a civil war. If you've ever seen the movie or heard about Black Hawk Down, that is the name of the mission there. And a lot of people criticize, like, why are we using our troops to go there? Like, why do we care about it? Like, yeah, it's terrible, but it's not really our business, right? Also, a lot of people kind of said, are we trying to put our democracy on them? Are we trying to be nation builders? Not cool with that, right? So just, here's the map here. This is Yugoslavia in the upper right, Somalia down in the lower part of it here. So yeah, that's foreign policy. Then we have our foreign policy in terms of trade. So NAFTA is a document, a treaty, basically, between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and it takes away the tariffs between these three places. The idea that we can trade freely north and south of the border. We're all neighbors, right? Makes sense. So the good part of NAFTA is everybody gets cheaper goods, right? If you take the tariffs off, that's a tax that you're taking off. Yay! The bad part of this is that a lot of factory jobs are now cheaper to go to Mexico. So we send a lot of jobs to Mexico, which means that a lot of people here are losing jobs. So that is going to have a pretty major effect on the economy. In terms of Clinton's legacy, he made some major domestic accomplishments, and there were some foreign policy achievements that were really important. However, the scandals really put a stain on his second term, and also the ability to move beyond partisanship. This idea that we can't compromise, Democrats and Republicans. So Republicans get a lot of blame, but Democrats weren't doing it either. And this is still something that goes on in politics today. So we're going to go ahead and end here, but come back next time for the George W. Bush video. So I'll see you then.